So I've mentioned in a past video that I'm very much against a prescriptionist approach to language. I believe that agencies like the French Academy are at best a waste of time and money, and at worst a means of limiting the ways that humans express themselves. If you want to know more about my particular opinion, you can watch this video where I believe I said, to maintain etymology in a completely standardized way would likely remove all humanity from the language. But although I'm very much against this protectionist movement to safeguard languages from outside influence and from interior change, I'm also very much for the preservation of dying languages. More and more languages of cultures that we might consider marginal are being either pushed off or killed off by the majority language, usually imposed by a former or current colonial power. And that's a shame not only because of the cultural implications, but because we're losing aspects of these languages that we may not have in our own. If you want more on this, there's a great video by Tom Scott, but that's not really what I want to talk about right now. So to summarize, I am very much against prescriptivist and protectionist linguistics, but I am very much for the preservation of endangered languages. And that can seem like a problem, because what both of these things boil down to is the preservation of language, which I am for in one case and against in another. So I have a hypothesis that human progress follows the trajectory of moving closer and closer to origins. As we learn more and more about the universe, we move closer and closer to the moments after the Big Bang and even the Big Bang itself, and we want to try to find something before, if that even makes sense. But we also move smaller and smaller. We've split the atom, we've split the proton, we see quarks, there's probably something else because why not? And I think the same holds true when we try to deconstruct arguments. We try to shave off all the excess until we find what we consider the main point, the meat of the argument, I guess you could say the main principle. And we hold these principles very highly and we associate them very closely with the people who make them. And it's an expectation of these people to be consistent across all of their arguments. But that's a real problem in my case, and in the case of many other people I've heard. Something I hear often is when people are accused of being against the death penalty but for abortion. First of all, I don't think anyone's really for abortion, just that it's legal and regulated and destigmatized. But I get what these people are saying. Both of these arguments sort of boil down to the question of being for or against death. But what we neglect to realize is that context does matter. These are principles, they're not values, and that's an important distinction to make. Principles concern the best decision for a particular situation, and they can change based on context. But values are a step beyond that. There's something we hold in our heart somehow that goes beyond everything else. There's no logical next step. If you fulfill a value, there's no further goal. You fulfill a value because that's what you do as a person. That's who you are. And that isn't to say that values never change, but a change in value really marks a change in the person. If someone is inconsistent in displaying their values, it's not that they're considering context, it's that they don't really have any values of their own. And that's when a person can be criticized for their arguments, when they follow two conflicting values. For example, a value I hold is that human dignity should come before all else, and I hope that everything I do in my life works toward fulfilling that value. And I will take different principled routes to achieve that if that's necessary. Going back to my example in linguistics, I believe that organizations like the French Academy actually undermine human dignity by limiting the way we can express ourselves and our ownership of our own language. So in that case, I am against the principle of the preservation of language. But in the case of endangered languages, almost always they're spoken by people who have been oppressed by colonial powers. Often their cultures are the one thing they have left, the one way they can fight back against these powers of oppression. And language is very tied to that culture. It's something to unify around. So in this case, I am for the principle of the preservation of language. There shouldn't be a problem when a person subscribes to two different principles, especially if they go toward achieving the same value. And I hope we can tame our impulse of scrapping the entire argument and leaving the principle, because in doing so, we remove the context, which can often be the most important part.